me. Hey, Ryan.
Hello. Can you first start by introducing yourself a little bit, telling everyone what you do and how you work in that space of consumer packaged goods?
Sure. On the business of food, the other side of it, there's the very sexy restaurant business and the very unsexy packaged goods land, as it is. I've been a food girly pretty much most of my career. I've always cared a lot about how people eat. I came up through marketing communications. I've been deep on dairy, chicken, 2 tours of duty with Chobani. I've been both as a baby brand educating in the Greek yogurt market, and then eventually as a billion-dollar brand. I've been embedded at Mars. I've been embedded at PepsiCo more times than I actually care to admit. And then while I was at Edelman, which is a PR firm, and I led the food and beverage sector in the New York office, I got to play with startups. And then I started to see how much more quickly things could move, and the bug bit me. So I went to Daily Harvest for a few years, which, if you don't know, is also subscription-based, as you mentioned, although now it's also available in retail and in grocery stores. Really encouraging people to eat more organic fruits and vegetables every day. And from there, I moved to Ghetto Gastro. And Ghetto Gastro, we're a food crew over here, is a culinary collective from the Bronx with 2 very talented chefs and 1 very talented artist from the who ventured into CPG during the pandemic because they had come to cultural acclaim, I would say, throwing niche underground dinner parties and having big branded productions with brands. And when the pandemic happened, obviously, those fancy parties were no longer going to be a thing. And so I started as the company's first president. I joined pre-revenue. It was venture-backed. I'm doubling down on these things because we're going to circle back on them in a little bit. And we took a line of non-GMO, plant-based breakfast items to Target nationally in all 1,900 stores, full chain. We launched with pancake and waffle mix, 3 flavors of that, syrups, and toaster pastries that were affectionately dubbed Bop Tarts, Black-owned toaster pastry. I then took us into TikTok Shop and Amazon, which was wonderful. And we had a great run on shelf, but unfortunately, we had to shut the CPG arm of the business down in December. So the guys will continue doing their amazing things as they do. They're very creative, passionate souls. And you never know when you could resurrect, but we really just had a broken fundraise. And unfortunately, if you are scaling a venture-backed business, that is the name of the game. So I can speak to all sides of it. I've lived the very, very good. I've lived the very ugly, sad part too, and it's tough. I think that it sounds like it's always a great idea to give yourself some scale, but there's many, many ways to skin a cat. And I think that if you're a talented chef who's really thinking about entrepreneurship in different ways, there's a lot more to consider than I think what meets the eye necessarily.
Let's talk about that ugly side a little bit and
Sure.
what you learn along the way, because it's in those failures that you have the best learnings often, isn't it? Not always
Absolutely.
in the successes.
I'm a mom. I have 2 young kids. They're 6 and 8. And one of the things I love about having school-age going children is in their classroom, it says, fail is first attempt in learning, which is cute. And we try to encourage it in a good growth mindset, of course. But I think the tricky part about CPG in particular is if you don't learn quickly, they're very expensive mistakes to scale. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest learnings is why you really want to get into it, right? If you're a chef, what is it that is taking you to think about launching in a packaged good format, right? If I had to, I'm not a chef, but from my vantage point, what I've always assumed is it comes down to revenue diversification, scalability, and reach, right? You want to diversify. Restaurants are a tough biz. Those are slim margins. It's hard on the body. It's hard on the soul, right? Very rewarding, certainly. But, CPG does allow for higher margins and potential for profit more than I think a restaurant does. There's always the sexy idea of an exit, right? I mean, we've all heard about
selling it to someone
else. Let's sell to Pepsi. Lots of activity lately between Siete and Poppi was just bought for over $1 billion also. So, people get excited about certainly seeing a price tag attached to it. Scalability is really nice, right? Restaurants are very hard to scale. There's only so many trustable humans, I feel like, that you can train yourself to be able to bring into it all. And ultimately, mass-produced consumer packaged goods are really about being able to have something easy to replicate elsewhere so you can scale a little bit more efficiently. And reach. how is he going to become a household name, right? You got to be in that household to become a household name. And there's a lot of restaurant to retail activity these days. I mean, if you think about there's always the OGs, right, that we've seen. We were talking earlier about Momofuku and our mutual love for their absolutely delicious noodles.
I do love those noodles.
Me too. They're real good. Carbone, Rayo's, Ruby Rosa, Magnolia. Those amazing banana puddings are now also available, in that way too. And they all started as New York City icons, and I think really expanded to get beyond New York, right? Get a little bit of that scale, become more of a household name, not necessarily just a tourist destination for a restaurant. Then there's obviously the fast food players, Taco Bell, Popeyes, not Chick-fil-A. You can find the establishments anywhere around the country, and then the products in your freezer or your pantry. But beverages are in on it too these days?
Yeah.
Lots of activity. Via Carrata, we were just discussing outside at the very delicious lunch, makes absolutely outstanding cocktails. Dutch Brothers is entering the space. I think they have, 1,000 locations? So it's an appealing play. But none of it is easy. And I think...
And so what actually happened it sounds like you started with a bang. You were doing well.
Yeah.
You got the product out there, and then you didn't get investment. What was the roadblock? What did you hit?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think there was a lot more. There's not a lot of capital currently. I will refrain from making any political statements, but flowing to Black-owned businesses as much or as excitement as we saw when they were first getting started, which is very difficult. Food production, especially if you are meticulous about your ingredients, is expensive. So we had a wonderful first year on shelf at Target, did several $1 million. We're teed up nicely for double-digit millions in our second year, and that included retail expansion to Whole Foods, Kroger, and Walmart stores, in addition to more activity on Amazon and TikTok Shop. We had a blast on TikTok Shop. It was so fun, given the marrying of content and commerce. We had a lot of fun working with affiliates.
So is that doing live shows on TikTok to sell?
No, actually,
or using influencers?
Influencers and actually affiliates, more importantly, so that they're making a buck off of all the work that they do too. It's their content at the end of the day, and I feel strongly about sort of sharing that pie, especially if they earn it overall. But again, it is expensive, and we needed $3 more million to be able to continue. We closed $650,000 and couldn't bridge the gap, unfortunately.
And what was missing? Because it sounds like everything was happening right.
Yeah, I mean, it's never. Part of it was just who would put in more money. And the appetite for putting in more money started to drop after the election, once we started to see what the climate would look like a little bit more aggressively and realistically. So I have a total little woo-woo side, and I'm a big believer in redirection is protection and rejection is protection. But a lot of our success on shelf was also based on incentivized pricing from those retailers, and none of that programming exists anymore. It's very slowly being it's not that slow. It's been dismantled. Target walked back a lot of their DEI commitments. I believe Amazon's doing the same, and so are many other retailers. So, and I don't know if anybody knows this as commonplace, but if you're a brand, you have to pay to be on a grocery shelf, and it's a hefty penny. So, it means a lot to a young emerging brand to be able to get out there for, let's say $5,000 as opposed to $75,000 just for the ability to sell on someone else's shelf. Yeah.
And now I assume you've pondered it. Where could we have done better?
Oh, absolutely.
Is there a way where you say this was a crossroad where we took the wrong path, or was it just a matter of circumstances?
I think it's always a little bit of both, right? And I think a lot of learnings, I'll tell you this, I think one of the things that's really important I've had a lot of time to digest, right? I spent December sad, I spent January angry, and then
the stages of grief.
The stages of grief, exactly, and acceptance as you come along with it. And again, you never know, those are some scrappy dudes, they may find a way to resurrect, right? And the toaster pastries are astounding, and I certainly hope they make a comeback somewhere. But I also think, if you're looking at a business that has sort of a personality component or a celebrity component or a chef component, there is an assumption that that will be what drives someone to buy it on a grocery shelf. I think that it's a very humbling experience to understand that most of America doesn't know. who that chef is, why that food is created, what it, if they do at all, right? You've got about 3 seconds to make a purchasing decision, and a lot of the time it's really going to come down to cost. So unless you've got a very committed, conscientious consumer who is versed in the space, you need to do different things tactically to help drive awareness and ultimately purchase of that product, whatever it is that you're selling on a shelf, because the audience may not be who you're used to jamming with,
And what do you think of the idea of like cutting out the supermarkets in this and launching products direct to consumer?
I love it.
Like Renee's doing with the subscription of Noma Labs.
I think it's genius, and I'll tell you why. Because it gives you a lot more ability to control your own circumstances, right? And I mean, I'm sure that means they have greater ability to be able to keep the keen eye on ingredient procurement. It's a very sharp lens on where and how you are selling. You also get all of your data, by the way, because you know who's buying your stuff.
Own everything.
You own absolutely everything. It comes right back to you. The margins are a lot higher. I think that there's a mistaken appeal of you should be on a grocery shelf because it's the only way to scale. That's not necessarily true. It's the only way to
Ghetto Gastro, when you have your community online, you're already very big. You could just tap into your own audience.
You could, but that audience is much smaller than, how many people
walk in the aisles. Yeah.
Exactly. So some of it is really just a question of, are you comfortable growing slowly? Do you really want to build community by community, brick by brick? And I'm sure, I won't speak for the guys, but I'm sure that if you ask them, they probably would say they might have jumped into a venture-backed game too quickly, without really considering the things that make them great, right? That make them beloved and that give them a followership.
And what type of compromises come up as well when you're scaling at that level,
Oh,
because
so many.
You say, like, if you're doing direct to consumer, you can control the procurement of ingredients. You can grow with the farmer.
You can, if your farmer can grow with you.
Yeah.
I had a really fun conversation once with one of the GG chefs about wanting to do a more fruit-forward toaster pastry. And he knew an acai berry farmer. And I'm like, okay, cool, but we got to make a million of them, So can we do that not on a grocery environment, Because I mean, you really do need to make the million of them. And also it would have to be a flavor profile that's recognizable and desired by your average grocery store consumer. And that person's probably not looking for acai berry. But if you wanted to drop it on your own channel, right, and only do 1,000 of them or something, then it does become a question of how are you producing and who's producing for you, right? Because look, the ultimate reality is look at the stuff that we were talking about, who's doing it right and who's in the space and what are they making, right? Sauces, easy to manufacture at scale, right? Even the beverages can probably be very easily replicated. A lot of it just comes down to what are you making, how hard is it to make, right? And where can you do that in cost-effective fashion?
Who's doing it really well? Who would you say, like, they're nailing it? They're the people that have got it right.
I think Rayo's always comes up as like the best in class model, and they were certainly early in that, and also did have a $1 billion sale for themselves. So that's amazing.
Why did they do it right? What?
Well, they had a signature product that is absolutely delicious. That the price differential between, let's say, a $4 sauce and a $10 sauce feels significant, right? But man, is it more delicious. And I think that the cost of that also isn't so large a jump necessarily that it would give you a huge barrier to entry. And so they had the ability to be able to have years and years worth of a following from a restaurant, right? But I don't think Rayo's is so well known a name around the rest of the country necessarily, that drove much. And so they looked at it as a cold, entryway and launch into it all and took it from there. I think Carbone's doing a really great job with the same, and it's sort of married and found different uses for a pretty good assortment. I think they just launched some new products a few weeks ago also with new sauces and staples. And I think there's I personally loved the conversation right before lunch about, global influence and authenticity and tradition that the chefs were having on stage. And I think there's a lot of emerging opportunity for those who are really bringing wonderful, globally inspired flavors to life. I love bachan sauces. Have you had them?
No.
Oh, you have to travel back, so I don't
That's
know if you
my-
can cart them back to Europe necessarily.
I often sneak things back.
Okay, well, if you can, I would get a few and tuck them into your your checked luggage if you possibly can. They're absolutely delicious, authentic sauces, Asian inspired, named after Justin the founder's grandmother, bachan, Japanese in nature, and I think they're doing a really great job. And these things take time. Right? Consumer perception and demand and growth takes time. Food's a long game, man.
What is the time scale on like going from concept to seeing it on the shelf?
On the shelf, you can get, I would say, okay, so we started riffing and developing when I joined pre-revenue Toast Your Pastries was new to us. So we did that in a year.
That seems fast, actually.
It is fast. Actually, I will say that's an accelerated timeline, and that's driven by a retailer's deadline of this is when you have to be on shelf and this is when the category reset happens, which is specific to the category that you're selling in. Those time frames only happen a few times a year. You're not going to miss your shot, right? Unless you have the luxury of being able to take an extra year. So I would say you usually give yourself 2 years for concept, testing, bringing something to life and putting it on shelf. But now, with so many better ways to be able to introduce a consumer to smaller batches, if you will, right? If I was going to launch something tomorrow myself, if I had a restaurant, I'd test it there and see how people were responding to it.
So selling it to the diners first step.
Why not? That's where your community is, right? And I mean, test it out. See how they get some feedback, see how that goes. Take it online. You can have a lot of fun with content and sort of bringing that to life as well. We certainly at Ghetto Gastro had a lot of fun with TikTok Shop, and it worked really well for us as a channel specifically. Before you really start to say, do I need to take this into a grocery environment? That's costly. I might need external funding to be able to do that, and which brings along a whole other host of challenges. Other people's money is other people's money, man.
What was your approach to TikTok Shop? Because I think that's like a step that's quite accessible to everyone, but
Very much.
not everyone knows how to do it.
Okay, so we got into TikTok Shop early, and I think that's partially why we had so much fun with it, and we're able to experiment. So for those who aren't familiar with TikTok Shop necessarily, TikTok now has their own ability to shop within their platform. The benefit, if you ask me, is that it's a seamless experience between content and commerce. So the same way that you would be trying to work with an influencer on, say, Instagram, right, or anywhere else to be able to sell something, it's just a really more cleaner, seamless experience for both the person who is receiving the information, and I think that they've got a great, ability to help incentivize and recruit affiliates on your behalf too. So we had a lot of fun with it, it took about 10 weeks, I will say. And I was watching that clock because I'll test and learn anything for a quarter, and it was week 10, and nothing had really moved yet. But we went fully organically. And that was a big part of trying to do things efficiently from a cost perspective was I didn't want to spend any money on advertising yet, So we did it efficiently. It took 10 weeks. And once that first video went viral, boom, it took off.
And you're not having to reach out to all these influencers. No, they can go on and choose a product and understand that they get a 10% affiliation.
It is a little bit of both.
Yeah, okay.
It is a little bit of both. And if you're going to be successful at it, I would highly recommend you look at both in parallel path. As a brand, you're going to want to recruit people who you think represent your brand, and you want those relationships and being able to have a dialogue with the folks who are doing it with you, right? Equally, if someone's not on your radar yet, doesn't mean that they shouldn't be, So if they've applied into the creator program or reached out to you on their own, it's an important conversation to have. Two-way street, I would say.
It's amazing, isn't it, that you've got access to an audience like that now?
It's crazy.
On your phone screen.
Yeah. Yeah, I've personally bought a lot of stuff off of TikTok Shop. Some
I've never
admittedly
used it.
don't need. I can't tell you you've never used it at all?
No, certainly not.
Oh, but you live in
Never
Europe.
ordered anything from it, no.
Okay.
I think we have it in Europe, but I've never used it.
The rules might be different, though, I will say. I think TikTok exists, obviously in other countries, too, but there's no TikTok Shop in Canada, so I don't know about what the rules would be for France or anywhere else.
What advice would you give to any chefs, restaurateurs in the audience who are like, I want to try this, I want to have a go? What would you say to them?
I would say go in eyes wide open. At the risk of sounding a little cliche, I think that I've always thought about it as like there's some fundamentals to like be really mindful of, and I like to call it sort of the 4 F's of CPG: food, actual fundamentals, funding, and fun. So start with your food first. You're a chef, right? I mean, and that's incredible in and of itself. What are you going to make? Is it a culinary high-end delicacy that, might appeal to a very small segment of the population? Or is it something that might have ubiquitous, mass use that is more of a pantry staple? Are you using rare, hard-to-procure ingredients? Okay, that might work in smaller fashion, right? But it won't necessarily scale. Are you willing to make changes to that, right? In order to get some economies of scale? The answer may be yes, and it may be no. And also, will it impact your end product, and what you're selling, or will it stay delicious either way? Start with the food, because ultimately, here's the other thing: nobody's going to buy anything if it's gross, right? So you can't fake your way out of the rest of it. So it's got to remain delicious. The second thing is fundamentals. And unfortunately, CPG is a very unsexy business that way, driven by, margins and market opportunity at the end of the day. So do you have demonstrable white space in the market? Have you identified your target consumer? What is your brand positioning? Here's one guideline I will just throw out there as something to consider. If you want to sell on retail shelves, I would really advise anybody thinking about it to have at least a 50% margin baked into it, because you're going to need it to make money at the end of the day. And how do you plan to bring that to life? Do you have a team? Because the team that helps support you in a restaurant environment probably is not the team, that needs to take something into a CPG environment. And are you comfortable with that too, right? Sort of sharing and bringing in more people along to the game. The third part is funding, and that is really, really important, because ultimately somebody's got to pay for this.
And I think that's the difficult hurdle. Everyone, like, okay, I've got my idea.
Yeah.
I'm a great chef. I think I've got a great name. I think this would work.
Yeah.
I know there's an audience. My restaurant is full.
Yeah.
But how do you go out and find that funding? Because I think people really struggle with that.
I think that's fair to struggle with that. There really aren't that many options or vehicles necessarily available. So I think the natural place is people will look for venture capital funding, right? Which means, and it's a blessing and a curse. I've worked in 2 venture backed places, and I'll probably work at some more, and as my career goes on, and I think that there's lots of ways for it to be wonderful for you. Maybe the right choice for you is, in fact, a venture partner who can put in a few rounds and fund your whole journey. But there's accountability, there's rigor with that, there's shared ownership, right, and guidance coming in, and growth targets that might be more aggressive than what you're comfortable with necessarily and accustomed to. It's a very different ballgame, to say the least. So what works best for one brand may not be what works best for you necessarily. And you really got to give a good hard look at how much you're willing to let somebody else dictate or be your partner in that journey, right? And the fourth thing I will always say is fun. Is this going to be fun for you as a chef? Because it's a completely different ballgame, right? And if it's not, are you going to hire the people who think it's fun? Like, okay, the reason why I think I've been so heartbroken over having to shut down the CPG end of Ghetto Gastro was because it was fun. I had a great time, bringing it to life. And again, not for everybody, but that's how I thought it was amazing. And if you don't think it's fun, you got to find the people that do. And if neither of you do, then I wouldn't do it, because you're not setting yourself up for success by any means.
Do you think people think it's a bit easier than it actually is?
I think people really think that grocery, period, is a lot easier than it actually is. It's a very antiquated system. There's barely been any, and it's ripe for disruption in and of itself, because it does, like I said, you're paying to be on those shelves. And so I don't think your average person walks around with that knowledge necessarily. And so I think people assume it's a lot easier. I also think people assume that there's a big difference between perception and performance, right? So especially now in the days of social media and TikTok and all the rest of it in particular, where you can perceive a brand as being very, very big and having a really dedicated following, but how much of that actually translates to purchase in those moments on shelf or off, is a small percentage of that.
How do the supermarkets, the buyers in these supermarkets, see these products? Is it something they're looking for more?
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, they're real trend spotters and trend watchers on their ends. You know, they're walking the floors. They take tours of cities and see what's evolving where. I'm sure there are chefs who have been here all weekend who have been approached by. I'd be very surprised, given the caliber of the folks we've had, who've probably been approached by retail partners of like, hey, you should bring something into our stores. It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, but they do stay pretty informed.
The level of trust within chefs is quite high. No, consumers seem to trust chefs, rightly or wrongly. I'm
As
not
they
sure.
should. Yeah, as they should. I mean, I've always thought there's nothing more incredible than what it is that the ability to feed people, right? So you're trusting the same way you trust a chef to feed you in a restaurant. You want to be able to trust them to make something in your home that you're eating at home.
Yeah, and it's something you put inside
In your
your
mouth.
body.
Yeah, in your body, literally.
Does anyone have any questions in the audience? Is there anyone out there who's like, I really want to do this, and you want to get some advice right now?
Live therapy.
Here we go. Nidal, he's probably got about 25 concepts, Nidal, hidden away somewhere.
No, I wanted at the agency we speak a lot with CPG brands from 4 to 500 to
Yeah.
startups. And one of the questions or the feelings that we get is once you enter the market, you are on growth mode all the time.
Sure are.
From local to regional, regional to national, then expanding your portfolio because you either grow or somebody else will eat your
Eat you alive.
yeah. So how do you enter the CPG market without that notion that okay, I'm going to be funding this for the rest of my life or until I sell it to a big name or like how do you balance that growth with actually having a profitable business and having to fund it from
It's really hard. And I will say part of being the funding portion is a hamster wheel, right? So once you're on, it's really hard to get off. And in particular, now there's also an increased conversation about getting to profitability, right? Earlier than I think, especially in a venture-backed game, than there had been for a while. I personally think that you should grow slow and steady. So part of the appeal of doing things like being D2C only is you can just be on, for a little bit and see what that grows to and how that channel goes. I think the riskiest part of it is, what always feels risky is, are we not growing fast enough, right? Or we're not looking at new channels quickly enough, more doors quickly enough. And then you start to chase your tail a little bit. So I always just say to try and do fewer better things. Dominate a region if you want to. And even if you're looking at national distribution, great, get some national distribution. Go in whole country. But then you've really got to be smart about whole country can mean a lot of things, right? You can look at top 25 DMA and be in large markets, or you can be literally absolutely everywhere as it is in smaller places. And depending on what it is that you're selling, maybe that's a great move for you, maybe it's not. But control the most that you can control, and I would say change your game plan from if it's 3 to 5 years, make that 10, right? And if it's a 10-year game, I've always.
And are the supermarkets happy if you're thinking long term like that, or are they wanting you to be faster, grow quick, short term?
I don't think it's the supermarkets necessarily who are giving you as much pressures as it is your funders.
The investors.
Yeah. And I think that the supermarkets just want to see the stuff that they have on their shelves fly off those shelves. Right. So there are many ways to start to dance that dance. It could be in more markets. It could be in more. It could be a heavier presence within 1 or 2, or 5 to 10 key markets. It could also be having a big blitz online, and really playing up your online presence. It really depends on the retailer.
So how do you sell it to the investor then? That idea of, hey, this is going to be more long term.
You got to have the right investor partners. You really do. I think that there are a few in the space that deeply understand the ins and outs of the food and beverage landscape, and those are the right people to have. And you've got to have the folks who will grow with you and get in the trend. We were very lucky at GG to have great partners who were willing to roll their hands up and sort of get into it with us. And unfortunately, it's still panned out, sadly, and that's with great partners. So I think and we have unfortunately, also lots of buddies, in the last 6 months who've had to shut their stuff down too, because it's been a really competitive landscape for fundraising in particular, who didn't have the luxury of having really great partners at them. It's a messier end. And nobody wants to break up or shut down in ugly fashion.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah.
Here we go. I'll come to you in a sec.
Great question. I think that I would look at it slightly differently as you can look at it as from a market standpoint. If you're really, yes, I would go regional. If you're looking at a region in particular, there's the headline to your question. But I might also consider who are the types of retailers you want to be able to be in. If you're talking about really, really large ones, Target, Whole Foods, Walmart, there are dedicated brokers that work exclusively with them that live and breathe in and out of, and they are most often than not former employees who have been on both sides of it all, and they can navigate those retailers are such huge systems in and of themselves, right? That they really do require dedicated expertise. And then I would look at channel. So somebody who has deep relationships and knows how to navigate a natural food space, right, is very different than that might be navigating a conventional food space. Beverage distribution is its own whole ball game, right? And so I would look at regional specialties. I would look at retail specialty, and I would also look for people that feel and sound like you. So if you have a brand and you want them to be, because they're now your interface, right? So they got to be in it with you. They got to be able to understand what it is that you're selling, why, what is your passion, what brought you in there, because you want to know that if they're the ones in more conversations that you are, that they can do it the same way that you would.
What's the future of this space? If you were going to launch another product now, what's a good trend that you're seeing? What would you do? What would you tap into?
Ooh, great question. And I think that if I was going to launch something myself, I would probably, product aside, because I don't know exactly what, I'm hot on all global flavors, always have been, and I think there's lots of opportunity there. I think that it's important. I would go very small and then use that traction to then build mountain by mountain significantly better. I would give yourself a long arc. I would give yourself time to be able to test, learn. Production's also really hard and really expensive. So there are, and that's always also a cost benefit analysis, right? So if you're creating something small because you don't want to go huge just yet, because that requires a gajillion dollars, you need to be able to find the people who will let you make small things and have small production runs, which is also very hard and difficult to scale. But because not all producers can grow with you, and not all producers will take small batches either. So I personally believe food and the food landscape in the United States is unnecessarily complicated. And that's my rant of the day. But I would say I would encourage folks to look at channels that you can control yourselves. I would look at limited batches of things and try to gain some more consumer perception. I would do all the ugly nitty-gritty homework first. So you're not learning as you go. And by that, I mean nail your brand positioning, nail your opportunity. It's humbling to understand and actually take, especially if you're a chef-backed business, to understand that a lot of what, maybe nobody knows who you are, in that setting. So build your community first and foremost, let that follow, and go boulder by boulder. Nobody says you have to start at the top of the mountain and then roll your way down.
And then finally, and we will let you catch this flight on time. Did you see the talk this morning about AI and using AI for new product development?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, what do you think about this? And
I think there's no universe in which AI isn't going to impact different portions of the entire process, right? So you can use it for innovation, you can use it for copy testing, right? You could use it, and that's what I mean, like do the ugly parts of the homework first. There's ways and tools to help make it so much easier. Now you can test out, A/B test 5 different concepts, right? That you probably asked ChatGPT to make you as a selection. I asked ChatGPT to make me a logo the other day, and I was disturbed, amazingly so, in the very best way. At the 4 versions it gave me back, they were dangerously impressive,
But not as good as Glutonomy's logos.
Absolutely, never, never, not anywhere close, to say the least. So I think that there are ways to look. I would get smart on AI and see how it is that you can help it work for you. There's parts of it that you just can't replace. It's the business of food at the end of the day, right? So automation will have different impact on what it is that you're producing depending on where it's produced and how. You know, maybe there will be little robots putting jars of Rayo's spaghetti sauce together. I don't know. You know, maybe there already are. I haven't been in any of their facilities, but it depends on what you're making.
And what's next for you? Have you got a new project now, or are you still waiting to line up a new project? What are you working on right now?
I don't, Ryan, but thank you for the shameless plug. I don't. No, I'm currently looking for a new job. So call me for any consulting needs, because I'm certainly starting to play more into the space. And I have been passionate about the food and beverage space for a really long time. I did a little bit of consulting work in the last few months to go deep on skincare and beauty, but I don't care about it the same way that I really care about food.
Yeah, it's a big shift. That's a big transition.
No, I mean, you know, if you think about it as all things that sort of go on your body, in your body, there's some connectivity, and I have a lot of CPG buds who very strongly believe that beauty is much easier to navigate, and so is skincare. But I've always believed that food is such a unifying, you know, factor. I'm obviously of South Asian descent. I grew up in very rural French Quebec, and so it's fun to sort of bring all of that together into life. And it's nice to live in a time now where you can sort of have multiple shades of your identity and not have to code switch all the time everywhere. So I'm always most intrigued by little brands trying to do some good in the world. So yeah, so hit me if you have any consulting needs, obviously. I'd be happy to chat CPG anytime.
Thank you, everyone. Please, a round of applause for Sushma.